Tonight on PrimeTime Politics, the House returns.
I thank the Prime Minister for calling a prompt by-election. I wonder if one day he might regret that decision.
He may notice a few things have changed since he was here last.
The Prime Minister finally comes face-to-face with the Conservative leader in the Commons, starting off cordially but with an ambitious government agenda. How long can it last?
We are in a minority parliament, and we will be looking to all parties and all MPs for collaboration.
Coming up, we'll speak to the government House Leader Steve MacKinnon. We'll ask what he hopes can be accomplished in this session. We'll also find out what Conservatives are willing to support as we hear from the party's House Leader Andrew Scheer. And we'll get into the political tightrope the two party leaders are walking as MPs get back to work. We'll speak with journalists Mia Rabson and Christopher Nardi. This is PrimeTime Politics. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, for the first time since the federal election, Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre met in the House of Commons today. A cordial exchange to start, but one that got heated quickly as the Conservative leader accused the Prime Minister of failing to live up to his campaign promises, and as Mark Carney tried to defend what he has done so far.
Why is it that all of this Prime Minister's promises of yesterday turn into today's disappointments?
We need to be clear about the scale of the crisis we are in. We need to be clear about the scale of investment that we need. $60 billion in new projects announced last week. $200 billion in investment announced last week. $100 billion in housing investment announced just yesterday. That's the scale of what we need.
Now, whether Canadians have the patience to see the impact of those measures is still unknown, but the government does have an ambitious agenda, promising a new industrial policy, a new climate competitiveness policy, and justice reform, among a host of other priorities. Big ticket items that will need parliamentary approval, a task made harder for the Prime Minister as his Liberal government does not hold a majority of seats in the House. Well, with more on the task before his government, we're now joined by the government House Leader Steve MacKinnon. Minister, good to see you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, and welcome back.
Welcome back to you as well. Listen, I was listening to your news conference this morning, and you know, we've heard this similar message from you before, that your government is very much investing in building this country's economy, that it is job one for your government. But I have to ask, at what cost? Because right now there is a lot of talk about the upcoming fall budget. What should Canadians be prepared for? Because, you know, the C.D. Howe Institute, for one, says the deficit this year could push over $90 billion thanks to the increase in defense spending that your government is making.
Well, look, I think, you know, Canadians are all following this closely, and like you and like I, Michael, we can do the math. We have said in the election campaign that we would spend less and invest more, and we started off with a bang. On Canada Day, every Canadian who pays income tax got a raise, an average of $840 income tax cut for average Canadians. We've invested indeed, as you mentioned, in the Canadian Armed Forces, getting us up to that 2% of GDP number and ensuring our nation's security, giving a raise to members of the Canadian Armed Forces as well, and cutting the capital gains provisions, cutting the carbon tax, taking GST off new home construction. So we've started off with these major investments, and indeed, they cumulatively are going to have a short-term impact in terms of the deficit. The other thing that we told Canadians, though, is that we would spend less, and what that means is this government's working very, very hard behind the scenes to review government spending, make sure it passes muster in terms of having an impact on vulnerable Canadians, on giving young Canadians hope that there will be a prosperous economy for them. And so we want to review spending from soup to nuts on all of those issues to make sure that they're having a maximum impact and are consistent with the objectives of the government.
Okay, but and I hear what you're saying, because I've heard it all through the summer that you are going to be investing while looking at capping spending. But at the end of the day, Canadians will be looking at a higher deficit. Your party in the campaign promised to be more fiscally responsible. Do you think Canadians will give you the leeway to report a bigger number of being in the hole come the budget, whenever that's tabled?
Canadians understand that we're at a major pivot point. We have to diversify our trade away from the United States. We've had a major rupture in terms of our commercial, at least our commercial arrangements with the United States. We have to get to work on getting our own economy moving, buy Canadian. We have a number of very, very important initiatives with respect to housing, with respect to investing in defense, creating a defense industry strategy here in the country, AI investments. So I think Canadians understand that we are at this major pivot point that's going to require comprehensive government action on a number of fronts. But they do expect that we will review current and ongoing government spending to make sure it's contributing to those big objectives and helping us get through this transition that I just described. And that spending that does not pass muster will have to be reviewed and will have to be very transparently presented to Canadians.
So that is where
something
so
that
that's where you will
may
demonstrate.
not necessarily meet the moment.
So that is where you will demonstrate more fiscal restraint.
Well, the budget will have all of this, of course, outlined in some detail, and the finance minister will be coming forward with all kinds of answers to the kinds of questions you're asking, Michael. But in the broadest and more general terms, we are continuing down this road that we were elected on, which is spend less and invest more, make sure that our future is secure, make sure that our economy is functioning, make sure that young people can be optimistic about the economic future of this country, and we're going to continue to make the investments that help us get there.
Okay. Now, at this point, or at least going into this week, the expectation was the budget was going to be in October. There's now reports that it could be November. Where do we stand on that, Minister? Are we going to see an October or November budget?
Well, the finance minister, as you know, it's a great tradition, gets to announce his or her budget date, and I'm sure Mr. Champagne will be doing that very soon.
Okay, well, I had to try. Listen, this is a minority parliament, and you are looking for cooperation to ensure this parliament works. You said so this morning during your news conference. But, in that news conference, you also immediately called out Pierre Poilievre and Conservatives for just, in fact, describing Mr. Poilievre's behavior last fall as irresponsible. If you're looking for cooperation, how helpful is that type of languaging?
Well, they did shut down Parliament for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, preventing progress on immigration, on housing, on any number of fronts. And we're observing that, Mr. Poilievre, some of the words might have changed, but the music kind of sounds the same. And we want to make sure that Conservatives consider, I think, the wishes of many Conservative voters in this last election, who now wish that this Conservative Party sit down and put their shoulder to the wheel alongside the government to work on some collaborative solutions. We won't agree on everything, but I do think that Canadians, and maybe even specifically Conservative voters, are looking for a bit of a change of tone, less toxicity, more constructivity, more recognition of the fact that we are at this very important pivot point as a country where we need to get some big things done. We can't afford the obstruction. We can't afford the delay. We got to get on with the job, and we're hoping Conservatives join us in that.
Okay, listen, quickly running out of time, but the Conservatives today did hit your party hard on the affordability issue. Polls say that is now Canadians once again their top issue. You talked about things like killing the consumer carbon tax, making that income tax cut earlier on. But beyond those, are you going to do more to address the affordability challenge? Because again, that's concern number one amongst Canadians right now, and the affordability challenge has not gone away.
Well, I do want to point out that the income tax cut is about a $24 billion measure. So that's $24 billion that that would have been in the coffers of the federal government that are now going to stay in the pockets of Canadians, and we're obviously very happy to do that. That's an important contribution to helping Canadians meet this affordability challenge that we obviously know is there. The second big one, the biggest category of any household spending, is housing. And if we can do anything to get those housing costs down, increase supply, unleash innovation, Canadian materials, Canadian construction labor in service of getting more housing built, then we know that that's going to bring down the monthly expenses of Canadian households. I would point you to things like childcare, where we're saving tens of thousands of dollars, literally, for parents of Canadian children in having a better childcare and better organized childcare system in this country. So we've done a lot on the affordability front. We'll have to do more. This is a challenge that, of course, as you say, is being clearly expressed to us. We have received that message and we understand it, and we're going to continue to work on it. And we've put a lot of things in place, but we'll need to do more.
Steve MacKinnon, always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Okay, well, with his thoughts on the fall session of Parliament, we're now joined by the Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer. Mr. Scheer, good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
Listen, your party had a caucus meeting yesterday. We heard Mr. Poilievre say that Conservatives are willing to work with the government to make this a productive session. I wonder, what will guide your party's support?
Well, first and foremost, it's important to point out that the Liberals have basically conceded that Conservatives were right. We were right to fight the carbon tax. We were right to talk about the crime wave that Liberal policies caused. We were right to talk about the border and the housing crisis, because in order to get elected, Liberals had to basically copy and paste and steal a lot of Conservative ideas. So what we're saying is, hey, when you do that, if you're going to lift something from a Conservative platform, we'll support you. We hope voters will eventually vote for the real thing, because we mean it, we believe in it, and we suspect that Liberals are just paying lip service to some of this and did just to get elected, and slowly but surely they'll revert back to their old Liberal ways. But we're starting off this session in a spirit of nonpartisanship, and we will support those bills that lower taxes, that get government out of the way of energy projects, of home building, and that actually secure our borders. When they go back to their old Liberal ways and they try to just expand the size of government, give government more control over the economy and spend and tax even more than Justin Trudeau, then we're going to shine a light on that and highlight that for Canadians.
Well, you use the word spend, and of course one of the big budget items will literally be the budget whenever that happens sometime this fall. You know, it makes me wonder whether or not your party is going to support a budget that has a substantial deficit. You know, bear in mind that the last economic update had the deficit sitting at about $60 billion. This fall's budget could be even higher. The C.D. Howe Institute saying with defense investments alone, it could be topping over $90 billion. Would you be willing to vote for a budget that had that substantial of a deficit?
Well, we believe that Mark Carney should be held to his own promises. He put in writing, he made a written promise to the Canadian people in the form of his platform to have a much smaller deficit than what's being speculated. You know, certainly much smaller than the 80 or 100 billion dollars that's being talked about right now. He then made a promise in the throne speech that he would cap spending. He blew through that promise in the spring already, but you know, we believe it's fair to say, okay, Mr. Carney, this is the promise you made Canadians. This is the promise you made in the throne speech. Were you lying? Were you being disingenuous? Did you have the king come all the way over from London to read a throne speech that was completely phony? So you know, those deficit numbers matter. They matter because when the government borrows billions and billions of dollars, they have to compete with everyone else who has to borrow money, and whether it's a business looking to expand or buy new equipment, or whether it's a homeowner looking to renew a mortgage. When government goes out and gobbles up billions and billions of dollars out of the economy, money being lent to the government means that it's not available to homeowners and business owners. It has a real negative effect on the economy. It also puts pressure on inflation, and on tax hikes. So we're going to be very vigilant on that, and at the same time, we believe that the government doesn't need to spend money on things like consultants. It doesn't need to spend money on a housing bureaucracy that's not actually going to build new homes. So we'll see what the Liberals put in that budget. We're going to be fighting for some kind of fiscal responsibility after 10 years of Justin Trudeau's massive deficits. And if Mark Carney comes in with an even bigger deficit than Justin Trudeau, it means he's already broken one of his key promises in his platform. Okay,
but this is a minority parliament, and if you don't like the spending or the investments, as Mark Carney would put it, you could work to bring this government down. You could rally with the other opposition parties. Would that deficit number be a line in the sand to trigger a non-confidence vote for you?
It's day one of the fall session, and you're already talking about when it might end. What I can tell you is that if Mark Carney is serious about working with us, then we hope that he'll take our ideas seriously. We hope that he'll have meaningful consultations with Conservative MPs and with the Finance Committee. We hope that he will end the practice of Justin Trudeau started of massive costs on things like consultants and on all kinds of wasteful spending that Conservatives will be highlighting. Conservatives are going to be highlighting this wasteful spending to show Canadians that it is possible to have fiscal responsibility without affecting core services for Canadians, just by ending a lot of the frivolous and really foolish spending that the government embarks on. $13 billion for housing bureaucracy. I mean, that hasn't worked for the last 10 years when Justin Trudeau tried that. So it's looking like Mark Carney is turning out to be just another Liberal. He's not very special. He promised Canadians that he was some kind of special guy that you could hire in a crisis. He promised to move at unimaginable speeds. Here we are in September. Nothing really has gotten done. And rather than having the fastest growing economy, which is what he promised in the G7, we have the fastest shrinking economy in the G7. So we're very disappointed at the lack of action over the course of the summer, and we're very pessimistic about the numbers that we're hearing as we do approach that budget, which now he's basically announced that he's delaying now into November. So not a great signal. You usually don't punt off things that you're not that you're proud of. You usually try to delay things that you're not proud of. But we'll keep watching.
Yeah, well, and we are waiting official word as to whether or not it will be in October or November. But listen, Mr. Scheer, before we're done, very quickly, the government House Leader called your party out today, saying you were irresponsible for holding up the business of government last year with heckling and procedural motions, some of which, it was thanks to your deep knowledge of parliamentary procedure. Will your party rely on those tactics in this parliament?
Well, I just have to correct Mr. MacKinnon. He has it completely backwards. The Speaker ruled that the government must comply with a lawful order of Parliament to dig into Liberal corruption where hundreds of millions of dollars flowed to Liberal-friendly board members. It was a massive scandal, and the government chose to have Parliament basically in a gridlock rather than come clean. So as long as there aren't any privilege motions, as long as there aren't any cases where Liberal ministers get caught in corruption scandals that they then refute to comply with the Speaker, then I can say we won't have those types of debates. But if they go back to their old Liberal ways, then it'll be up to the government on how to respond to that. What I'm saying is that if the Liberals sincerely take Conservative ideas out of our platform, put them in legislation, obviously we're going to support things that we campaigned on and that we have already supported in the past. So there's definitely a path to getting things done, and we'll see what the government House Leader does with that.
Andrew Scheer, always appreciate the time. Looking forward to more in this session. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Well, time now for a look at what else happened in politics today. As Parliament returns, there is, as you heard, a lot of talk about the upcoming fall budget. Prime Minister Carney does not give a number, but says the deficit will be substantial, hinting 2 weeks ago there will be elements of austerity. That is something the NDP leader, interim leader Don Davies, took issue with when we spoke to him earlier today.
Mr. Carney has signaled that this is an austerity budget, and yet, last month we found out the Canadian economy shed 100,000 jobs, and we have the highest unemployment rate in 10 years. 1 in 6 young people don't have a job. It's about 15% unemployment. So we think it's the wrong time for austerity. It's the wrong time to be slashing services that Canadians rely on and cutting family-sustaining jobs. We think it's a time to invest in the Canadian economy.
And you can watch the full interview with Don Davies on the CPAC YouTube channel. The Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet is laying out his priorities for the fall session. Blanchet says his MPs will focus on getting investment for projects in Quebec, protecting the environment, and dissuading the government from investing in Western oil projects. When asked about collaborating with other parties, the Bloc leader says talks are underway to meet with Pierre Poilievre soon, and added the Bloc will work with anyone who favors Quebec interests.
I want Canadians to know that the last election was secure. No security or cybersecurity incident affected the administration of the election.
And finally, Elections Canada tabled its final report today on the federal vote held in April. The agency acknowledges the spring election was subject to mis- and disinformation campaigns, but overall says the election was a success. Canada's Chief Electoral Officer Stéphane Perreault says his agency and the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force did not detect any foreign interference campaign that would affect the results of the vote. Well, as we talk about the return of Parliament, both the Liberal and Conservative leaders have some work to do. The latest polls indicating the Carney honeymoon is losing steam, and Pierre Poilievre, well, he continues to face a familiar problem, his unpopularity. To explore what this will mean for the fall session, we're now joined by Mia Rabson, Deputy Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Canadian Press, and Christopher Nardi, Parliamentary Reporter for the National Post. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
So listen, let's begin with Mark Carney here. Obviously a very big agenda based on investing in the economy, but given how his popularity is dipping a bit, how much pressure is on the Prime Minister right now? Yeah, I'll get you to start.
I mean, there's always a lot of pressure, and right now the pressure in some ways has grown because he's now being expected to deliver on what he promised last spring. I mean, the Conservatives are suggesting that he's failed by not having delivered by now. I think most Canadians are willing to give him a little bit more time than that, but they don't have the excuse anymore that they only have a few weeks of a session and there's this or that going on. Now, sort of the rubber is hitting the road for him right now. He had two big announcements in the last week. He unveiled the first list of major projects. Yesterday, they announced the big Build Canada homes, but you actually have to deliver some of those results. Canadians want to see action. This is a Prime Minister who said he expects to see action. So we are still having to wait to see what he can deliver. These are big promises, and he is probably learning on the job that the machinery of government does not move very fast.
Yeah, and I think that's a big disconnect, right? Because I think the average Canadian will hear a politician say, we're going to do this quickly. And what they really mean to say is, we're going to do this quickly by Ottawa standards, yes. Right? So talk to us about the pressure you think the Prime Minister is under, Chris.
Well, I think that there was some interesting data that came out just before his cabinet meeting, or in Toronto, or came out during, and was that how priorities for Canadians have shifted. What used to be during the election, what got him elected, was Trump, right? The Trump tariffs, the trade war, and that has shifted tremendously. Now Canadians are much more worried about affordability, about housing, and these are all the priorities that he said he was going to work on. But as Canadians' interests shift, and he can't really rely on the Trump boogeyman in a way to kind of surf his popularity while he gets those machinery of government changes in place, people will start saying like, hey, why is my juice still so expensive? Why is butter still so high? And the grocery and the housing and all that, like these things don't change overnight, but he did promise so much and so much change. And that's obviously the Conservative strategy that we saw today in question period, was really to just hammer this affordability, food pricing, house pricing, and crime obviously have been three things that have been big in the news all summer. Carney has, as Mia said, a certain amount of lenience and patience that Canadians will give him, but only so much. If you say that you are fundamentally going to rewrite the Canadian economy and trade, you're going to do it at literally, quote, pace, speed that we've never seen before. You got to start acting rather quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it does make me wonder, though, about how much of his agenda can go forward without further amendments. Because to be fair, he has eliminated the consumer carbon tax. He did introduce a middle-class tax cut by altering the level at which people are actually taxed when they file each year. But at the end of the day, prices are still high. Perhaps gas not as high as it was before, but groceries certainly are, which again the Conservatives are hammering on. Do you think the Prime Minister is going to have to alter his agenda in any way to seem, or at least to respond to Canadian concerns, Mia?
I don't know know that he's going to have to alter his agenda. He might have to alter some of his language. I mean, to your point about gas prices, I mean, gas prices, at least in Ottawa, have crept back up. And I heard someone on the radio this morning complaining that the prices are as high as they were under the carbon price, and they're not getting their rebate anymore. So people are starting to notice, maybe what they used to have on that. But, affordability, cost of living, housing, these are the key issues. This is what, keeps people up at night. This is, they don't necessarily stay up at night because they're worrying whether Donald Trump is going to put a new tariff on Canada, but whether they can afford to, put their kid in soccer this fall or, buy food for their family. Those are the things that actually bother people and that worry them. And so I think his language has to maybe change their communication. Communication is not a strong point for this government. It's something I think they need to work a little bit harder at and to communicate their plans and also where we're going. And I think there is a disconnect between some of the big things he's promising, like these major projects. Okay, you're building an LNG plant, you're adding a copper mine. How's that going to make my juice more affordable? And so they need to sort of spell it out for people what's going to happen down the road and why this actually matters to them.
Big promises so far, not a lot of details. So, we'll be watching that tightrope. But I also want to talk about the tightrope that Pierre Poilievre walks, because he still has a very familiar issue. He's now been reelected, but still not very popular. When you look at the latest polls, for example, Nanos has Poilievre at 28%, Carney at 50% when it comes to preferred prime minister. When you look at Angus Reid, 58% of Canadians still hold an unfavorable impression of the Conservative leader, so nearly 60% of Canadians. Do you think we're going to see a different Pierre Poilievre as a result, perhaps a little bit because of Mark Carney, but because his numbers are still very much stuck where they are, Mia?
I mean, I think that Mr. Poilievre learned that lesson during the election. I mean, that was what everybody kept telling him throughout the campaign, and he tried then to sort of put on a happier face. So a little bit of it in question period today. He sort of started off the session with a little bit of some self-deprecating humor, saying that he was sorry he was late. He kind of had to go and have some meetings in Alberta, referring, of course, to his having to go win a by-election in Alberta. I think he knows that. And I think he's trying. I'm just not sure whether Canadians are buying what he's selling yet. But I mean, voters are fickle, and right now they're still willing to give Carney Liberals a chance. Whether or not that changes, or when that changes, if that changes, Mr. Poilievre is still there, and even if he's unpopular. Before Mr. Carney took over, Canadians were still willing to vote for him, even though he was unpopular then too.
Yeah, Chris, what do you think of the challenge before the Conservative leader?
Pierre Poilievre is not a man that changes quickly, if at all, quite frankly. And I actually question how much he's going to try to change fundamentally, because you're right that he did try that pivot of the more smiley, T-shirt, jacket, no glasses during the election. And, there was a little bit of a positive boost for him towards the very end of the campaign, but I don't think that's what it was that caused it. And I think he's not someone who changes quickly. So I perceive what his strategy is he's just going to try to do to Carney what he did for Trudeau. He suspects, presumably, that there won't be an election for another year or so, maybe give or take more than that, which gives him a lot of time to rebrand Mark Carney. And we saw it today. They hard launched, I guess, a new slogan for him, just another Liberal. We've heard it 4 or 5 times, I think, in question period. Different questioners said, well, he's just another Liberal. So they're going to be trying slogans. That is fundamentally what they managed to do to Justin Trudeau. Rebrand him as the carbon tax this, the soft on crime that. It worked. It was brutally effective on Justin Trudeau. We saw it. And then eventually beat him out in a contest not of popularity, but simply of branding and of presenting yourself as someone who can fix all the problems that you've rebranded the person as. And so I think that's the strategy that they will be taking, because I think anyone that spent any amount of time around Pierre Poilievre has realized this man does not change, and if he does try to change, it doesn't always look the most non-disingenuous.
I think it's also worth noting that the biggest test that Mr. Poilievre has in the next couple of months is his own leadership review, which is in January. The fact that he won his by-election in Alberta by more than 80% probably puts him in a good stead with the party right now, but he also did lose an election after being up by 25 points. So, he's going to have some tough questions to ask himself and to answer for the party, and that, I think, is going to have to be part of his focus over the next couple of months as well.
Okay, we were watching. I will say, though, I don't know why people lose their glasses to be more popular. Yeah. Speaking for the three of us, I think it works, personally. Thank you for that, Chris and Mia. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
And that is Primetime Politics for this Monday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. A quick note as we leave you this evening, Newfoundland and Labrador has announced the provincial election in the province will be on October the 14th. Watch for coverage of that right here on Primetime Politics. Take care.